Thank you, Ms. Maymay. So we'll get started with our first thesis today. This is Natalie. Natalie's been a hard worker all year long. The greatest thing about, maybe the funniest thing about Natalie is just watching her try to escape when people are having discussions with her neighbor, Abigail, over here, because, well, you'll understand that later probably. Anyway, so Natalie's got an important topic about forestry. It's sort of a relevant topic today. Here's Natalie's words. These are her acknowledgments. She says, "I would like to thank God for everything, my family who tolerates my excuses to stare at my paper without doing anything, especially my sister who carries this paper, my friends whom I share struggles with in this thesis journey, Mr. Joel as my thesis advisor who gave me insightful ideas in writing style, rhetoric teachers, Mr. Wade and Ms. Maymay for grading my paper generously." And so Natalie's title is "Money Does Grow on Trees, Why Indonesia Should Advance Sustainable Pulpwood Plantations." All right, Natalie, I'm going to get the timer set up. I'll tell you when you can start. All right, you can start when ready.
Picture a math test. Silent, but rustles of problem sets, properties of trigonometric functions, and pen scratching against math paper are heard. Even on a daily basis, math paper is unavoidable. Warm-up exercises must be done on math paper or our grades suffer. Notice the repeating word, not math, but paper. Aside from maths, all the other subjects use paper for assignments and assessments. Aside from school, official documents and reports are written down on paper. Like any other object we utilize each day, we tend to disregard how paper came to be, its history and effect to a greater scale. As for paper, let's trace this back to where it all started. Hutan tanaman industry in Indonesia, vast plantations mainly growing eucalyptus and acacia trees for the pulp and paper industry. Indonesian forestry sectors rooted back to the Dutch colonies in the 17th century and officiated under the Indonesian government Regulation Number 5 in 1967. Within this period, forestry revolved around Hak Pengusahaan Hutan, a business managing natural forests for plywood production directed toward both the local and international markets. Between 1980 until 1990s, pulpwood demand increased while plywood exports were limited. So, business started to shift to hutan tanaman industry. Unfortunately, forest degradation is encountered in this business, especially in natural forests where HPH emerges. It is recorded that 100% of forest fires in Indonesia were caused by anthropogenic activities, around 1/5 related to or inland of HTI. However, global and national demand pushed HTI to continue. In response to this, the Indonesian Government Regulation Number 7 in 1990 was applied as the basis of HTI, with the restriction that HTI must only be built on unproductive lands, not natural forests. HTIs are considered monocultures, only a single type of tree planted on a big scale. On the contrary, HPH are biodiverse. Making up a vast area of Indonesia, forests are significant to this country and even the world. Life quality from the aspects of social, economical, and science are affected, starting from the small scale of local communities, then spreads to the people all over Indonesia. If the people have not yet met decent living standards, how can the nation step into prosperity and compete on the global scale? The grass will always be greener on the other side if one does not take care of one's own grass. Humans are called to care for creation by, for example, providing basic necessities for people who live physically side by side with forests and taking care of said forests. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, so humans as stewards are responsible to cultivate nature, which also reflects the lawful principle grounded in HTI. Forestry is often understood on surface level as a mere activity of cutting down trees to be sold or processed. The classification of forestry business is especially not much of a public awareness, leading to the assumption that all loggings originate from a common source. But it must come into attention that HTI serves as an alternative to reduce the risk of losing natural forests. Therefore, activity of HTI must continue under strict and ethical regulations alongside sustainable movements for three main reasons. HTI enforces sustainability practices, it increases national economic, and it fosters local infrastructure improvement. First of all, HTI has an environmental level benefit of sustainability practices. Legal HTIs as artificial nature are established on unproductive lands to restore its productivity and serve as a sustainable media unreachable by conservation forests. The Ministry of Environment and Forestry aims to preserve natural forest ecology as well as develop the unproductive lands. HTI limits natural forest exploitation by acting as a phone case in which usually they protect habitat that damage natural forests. It functions as the primary target for harvesting, absorbing pressure that would otherwise destroy natural forests. Logging in natural forests alters the balance of the ecosystem, particularly through illegal logging motivated by low maintenance and high profit. By shifting the harvest orbit to plantations, natural forests are relatively undefiled. Due to its dense fire alerts and flammable tree species, HTI lands are equipped with fire detectors in hotspots. Additionally, companies station patrols and waterbombing nearby as a necessary prevention in disasters. So damage can be minimized inside controlled areas rather than spreading unpredictably through untouched natural forests. Another point is that HTI trees aid in carbon sequestration to cover the current climate problem, which is caused by the rise of greenhouse gas concentrations, which trap heat in the atmosphere. To counter these effects, HTI trees are helpful for carbon storing through widespread tree planting. A study conducted in South Kalimantan observed the carbon sequestration of Acacia mangium and Eucalyptus pelita. Based on the experiment done on site, the total carbon stock value consisting of the trees themselves, understory vegetation, necromass, and in the roots of Acacia and Eucalyptus are 155.967 tons per hectare and 77.1 tons per hectare, respectively. When planted all together, the carbon sequestration will become more effective. Second, HTI offers national economic advantages. One way is by maximizing pulp capacity to eliminate imports dependency. Currently, Indonesia has an annual demand of 11.45 million tons of pulp, which the domestic supply still fails to meet. Indonesia's largest HTI company, Asia Pulp and Paper, has a pulp production of 7.25 million tons per year out of its pulp capacity of 20.86 million. Having a huge gap between demand and supply, HTI companies import from other countries at an unreasonable cost. In 2024, importing 2.2 million tons of pulp was reportedly to cost $1.74 billion US. Import itself is not sufficient. Expansion of HTI is crucial to fill these industrial wood gaps. Export is the next focus for Indonesian HTI companies to boost the economy by maintaining Indonesia's macroeconomic stability. Contributing to 3.68% of the country's GDP, the pulp and paper sector is considered to be resilient and able to survive even when others fail to. Most exports are shipped in the form of pulp and paper because manufactured goods are less affected by unpredictable price fluctuations. In 2024, exports of 11.98 million tons of pulp and paper earned $8.09 billion US for the country, possibly increased after maximizing pulp capacities of HTI companies. An important point in the economic sector is to bring in foreign currency to retain the value of rupiah. Payment of exported goods is usually in USD, but to pay workers, earnings must be converted into rupiah first. Thus, the demand for rupiah will be high since business owners want to buy rupiah in exchange with USD, keeping the rupiah steady and not decreasing is crucial to prevent inflation caused by the rise of imported goods price. Heavy machinery, being important tools driven by Hatay, will experience production escalation with expansion of industrial plantations. Weighing less than 15 tons, effective excavators are enabled to have accessibilities in narrow areas and fragile soil conditions. Excavators used are also expected to be Indonesian enough to keep the profit in local level, as measured by bobot manfaat perusahaan and tingkat komponen dalam negeri. Upon hitting at least 40% local content as the sum of BMP and TKDN, an excavator is prioritized in local government use. For example, a 13-ton class excavator, Komatsu PC130F-7, has a BMP value of 15% and TKDN value of 39.66%. The threshold value is therefore surpassed. In Hatay concessions, soil fertility is measured by potency in tons per hectare, preferably 80 tons per hectare, for adequate profitability and fertility. Under this value, the use of a 10-ton excavator is able to process 1,125 tons of wood in a month. Referring back to the prospect of additional machinery to process wood, more units will be required for harvesting. Hatay heavy machinery approximately has a solid 0.034% involvement in the country's GDP, acting as a key enabler and strong foundation for other sectors. Last, Hatay targets local infrastructure improvement within its closest community. Many villagers treat forests not only as home, but a source of income. Before Hatay, villagers relied on seasonal illegal jobs offered by financiers and middlemen who monopolize goods from the city. Once Hatay groups are surveyed and established their plantations there, they offer job opportunities and decent structured payroll. The workflow, divided into upstream, midstream, and downstream, employs villagers mostly in upstream roles close to their domain. They receive the Regency minimum wage and a 13th-month tunjangan Hari Raya bonus. These ensure them a steady income unmatched by informal tasks. Upon the formation of a plantation, Hatays are known to build roads to give access for villagers to travel around the forest and even outside. With paid slips, workers are able to afford vehicles through credit, paving businesses like trading because they do not need to rely on intermediaries anymore. An upside goes the same with health center visits. It is now easier for villagers to stop by large health centers for hygiene inauguration. Under the CSR initiative, public facilities are pointed out as pivotal aspects. Hatay companies, as the government's proxies, fund schools for both children living in rural areas and those living near the headquarters. Accordingly, April Group presents data showing the literacy and numeracy rate of children in their respective school to exceed 50%. It is not limited there. April offers Sayap Garuda Scholarship to dedicated students and April Learning Institute to train staff to polish their skill sets. Safety net is highlighted by registering permanent workers of Hatay groups for healthcare insurances like BPJS. This point is crucial to emphasize financial security and especially an assurance to the villagers that their lives are valued and protected. In record, 100% of APP Sinarmas permanent workers have received insurance coverage. Mobile medical units and medical clinics like Posyandu are stationed in the villages as first aid help, including encouraging nutrition programs to inhibit stunting rates. Consequently, Indonesian villages' development index score has rapidly soared in recent years. In villages where resources are scarce, Hatay mitigate this challenge by supplying water and electricity. During El Niño events, when the season suffers dry conditions, streams become stagnant, causing villagers to have difficulty in accessing water. With programs such as Desa Makmur Peduli Api, wells and storage tanks are integrated in the villages to keep them hydrated. This has helped improve sanitation in the household affected, hence the improvement of public health rate. Decentralized electricity in settlements that are often bypassed by the government's national power grid are also prepared. Power is distributed to complement both pulp mills and daily life. April Group, having already exceeded its 2030 goal of 25 megawatts power supply by 1.3 megawatts, has now doubled its target to 50 megawatts. Beyond that, these projects often include biomass-generated powers to promote sustainability. Despite proof of Hattei's positive contributions, critics may argue that in contrast to trees in natural forests, trees in Hattei are significant when it comes to providing clean air. It is undeniable that Hattei trees are smaller in diameter and have shorter cycle. However, one must take account of the fact that all species of trees, biodiverse and monoculture alike, have carbon sequestration. When planted in a group, they will bring forth considerable impact of inhaling carbon dioxide and absorbing water, two basic yet important functions in the environment. Indonesian forestry is moving toward Volume net sink 2030 to decrease carbon emissions, expected to reach an ideal net sink in 2030. As of the 2025 report, forestry is sequestering 31.9 million tons of carbon, contributing to 22% of the 2030 target and also allowing Indonesia to secure millions of dollars. Although Hattei focuses mostly in monocultures, the companies are also expected to plant trees for conservation purposes and longer-term water absorption. This way, disasters are prevented from repeated events such as the 2025 massive flood in North Sumatra due to the deforestation for oil plantations. Furthermore, non-government organizations pay attention to Hattei matters, such as the Indonesia Forest Certification Cooperation to retain sustainable forests. If requirements in IFCC are not met, a forestry company is not qualified to be official and must not commence. On the economic front, the opposition would point out the dirty advantages that conglomerates earn, all at the cost of the locals' and workers' living condition. While the conglomerates are able to relish their profits, there is no guarantee that others associated with this business enjoy the benefits. A suspicion as such is common because profits earned by these companies are an enormous amount, and owners possess the largest part. But it does not mean that workers do not get a share based on their workload. Similar to the previous case, companies unable to fulfill prerequisites given by officials are not considered legal Hattei and may not operate. In this case, the CSR initiative and sustainability reports are published to prove that these demands are indeed granted by the companies and supported by the government. Workers must receive at least the regional minimum wage. Profits are allocated to local improvements, and local smallholders are involved in the projects. Before industrialization reached the rural areas, the situation in the village was dire and livelihood was low. Welcoming Hattei has invited significant transformation to these villages that subsistence practices cannot match. Throughout this thesis, we have delved into the urgency of hutan tanaman industry as a sturdy business sector of which Indonesia is still heavily dependent on, starting with care for forest and the environment, followed by prosperity for the nation, and narrowed down to attention for the villagers physically living by Hattei. This thesis concerns the country to not end up in misuse. All in all, our nation and nature deserve an advancement through this sector because those built our country. Next time, when we see our math paper, are we going to be melancholic and spend the entire period thinking about the 1,000 stories of a sheet of paper? No. Rather, let's try to explore it now for a brief moment. Catch a glimpse when our paper were still pulps and pulp still wood. Behind all those material transitions, we give credits to workers tirelessly working from day to night in the villages. Alongside production and protected forests, we want to build upon the expectation of a healthy living for those villagers. In a general view, there is a fine line between creation and destruction in regards to Hattei, and our role as average people is to draw a thicker line. As a form of our support for Hattei, we can advocate the paper over plastic movement to incentivize the expansion of Hattei. For every scar left on the land, let us be the hands that mend. Thank you.
All right, good job, Natalie. Our panelists today are Ms. Monique and Ms. Peru. Ms. Monique, I'll let you have the first questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wade. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, Miss.
You did such a great job exposing your thoughts and ideas about this matter. But then, can you share a little bit what inspired you to share it with us?
Okay.
What was behind this scene?
So I feel like, thank you, Miss, for the question. I feel like the topic of forestry is not much discussed in today's time because, and I think even the government and many companies already neglect the awful practices behind. But then, actually, in reality, the the grounds of HTI stands on a lawful purpose that we want to care for the environment and for the people, not only those in the villages, but all over Indonesia. But then, yeah, many people still neglect it, and the illegal activities are normalized, but then those are just wrong. And technically, HTI is not something that we should oppose against because actually in reality it advocates for all these positive impacts for the country.
Okay, get it. Yeah, because I believe that we are going to dig deeper about this because in the first place, when I read your thesis, you know, in my first genuine thought, like, wow, Natalie, you have a big heart to see this from a very good point of view because what we noticed or heard probably was not as beautiful rainbow as what you mentioned here. But then I love for both of, like all of us to dig deeper. But let us start with the first thing that I think this is kind of like very interesting because you started with the math papers. And then I just would like to hear like, because like you try to suggest like paper over plastic, right? Which is, it's very encouraging, yeah. But then I would like to ask you further, like paper over plastic movement to incentivize the HTI expansion, but then you add a little bit note of it like, please make sure that it's in the moderate amount, right? But then actually, as we know, or probably if you have the data further, is that possible in the moderate amount, or you think that it's always been in the huge volume, which
Okay.
is it's impossible in the moderate amount?
I think the moderate amount in question is something rather subjective because what I consider moderate may not be moderate for others because maybe others need paper more than I do to like write stuff and publish reports and stuff. But even in the data currently that we have, there are millions of tons of paper demand in Indonesia annually, which also shows that it's in a huge amount. But and there is no guarantee that all the papers used are for useful stuff. Some are probably, like I said, be put in the miscellaneous cabinet. So despite all that, I think paper are still necessary, and for when we ourselves use it, we can try to sort what should we use the papers for and what should we not use it for, because like again, it's a subjective thing, and I think that's what I can give because we cannot really make sure how many amount of paper that everyone uses, but every time you use it to the useful ones, not for like to make paper planes and stuff like that.
Okay, so it means, I mean, like, thank you for explaining. It means that from your generic point of view, you would like to have for each one of us every time we use the paper, we use it wisely,
Yes.
right? But then, like, let's say, please help us to see that if we just simply swap the plastic for paper without changing the people's consumerist culture, aren't we just like moving the environmental scar from the ocean to the land, you know, from the plastic to the paper?
I don't think so because as long as these papers are used to a good use and it's not like going to be burned because those will release the carbon contained in the paper, in the cellulose, that will not destroy the lands instead of the oceans. But even in the lands, those even from the trees, that the trees absorb the carbon, and even after getting cut, only the trunks left, and we shift the form into pulp and then into paper, those carbon are still in there. And as long as we use it to good use and we don't cause any further environment damage, it's not, instead, it's for the environment itself, not to destroy it, but to protect it.
Okay, so now here you are in front of your friends. What you can say to all of these people in front of you, how they are going to be wise in using papers instead of being consumerism, defending like, this is my paper, you know?
Okay. I think for everyone, including myself, we can use our math paper. Oh, but we're gonna graduate anyway. But before, we should have like used our math paper for warm-up exercises. Let's say in like one math paper, we can fit in 4 warm-up exercises, and I think that's what we're supposed to do. But Mr. Abed keeps collecting it, and like we keep getting back those that are still partially filled. And I think it's also for math teachers, because please allow students to use the back of the math paper, because those are very saving paper. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Mr. Wade, how many more minutes?
Well, you have about 2 minutes if you want to use them.
Okay, just one quick question. I'm just really interested, feeling interest in the follow NetSync 2030, you know. So you defense the HDI relies heavily on framework like IFCC and follow NetSync 2030. But then at the same time also you explicitly noted that there was still massive floods, right?
Massive, what, Mr.?
Flood.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, occur due to the poor land management. So the question is Indonesia's primary crisis lack of regulations or failure of law enforcement?
First of all, I would like to address that the massive flood is in oil plantations, which it is not necessarily HTI, but then if a similar case in HTI happened, then massive flood can also reoccur. And I think I also realized that there are unfortunate events happening in HTI lands, but then I think many companies have started to restructure the regulations so that they are more careful in maintaining the land. So yes, the regulations, some of them do fail, but they try to fix it so that the lands are still healthy.
So you meant regulations still exist,
Yes.
but is there any failure in law enforcement at the same time, or you think so far it was enough?
In practice, there are a lot of failures, and a lot of them, I think. But like the laws have existed, but these laws, most of them are also applied like recently, like maybe in 2010s and stuff. So the HTI companies that were built before have not really came into the awareness of these laws. So they still have failures in their practice. But after knowing that these laws are implemented, they restructure their practice.
Thank you.
Okay,
Miss.
Ms. Prue.
Hi, Hi.
Hi, Miss.
So I am really glad to be able to be a part of this because a little bit of lore background. When I was reading it, I have no idea what you're talking about. I was very lost. So I'm just really glad that you brought this up because it definitely opened up my eyes into like, oh, that thing existed in Indonesia. Especially interesting additional lore to the background of it is that my parents were actually engineers in APP Group at one season of their life.
Oh.
Yes. So it was very weird for me to go like, do you know this existed in 19 something? And they were like, yeah. And then I had this whole background of this is how paper machine work. Don't care. I'm not the engineer, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you see it. But fortunately for you, I'm not the engineer, so I will not ask questions about that. I will, however, be asking a lot of questions in more of the social side of everything, if you don't mind. Again, major disclaimer, I am not against you, child. I have nothing against you, okay?
Okay, Miss.
Right. So I really, really am very curious because like this has been going on since before I was born, literally, right? And so it's been going on, but it's not been, I don't think it has been effective, right? That's why you're arguing that this needs to be done. So could you explain to all of us what are the difficulties at those times to the point that it has not been effective until today? And how will you predict that to replicate perhaps in the present and the future?
Okay. I think that the difficulties that the Hati companies face are mostly in the environments and the social areas with the villages. Like in the environments, I think it's mostly because they first conflict with peatlands, and second, they usually cut trees from natural forests in which if they are licensed, then it's okay as long as it's also not excessive. But then if it's unlicensed, then obviously it's an illegal logging. And I think those difficulties are still encountered today, and even current practices still faced with law because, due to that. But I think current laws have specified the issues of these. Like, let's say they must not drain the soil into a certain depth because below that, peatlands are need to be wet to store a massive amount of carbon. And then let's say like illegal loggings, I think those participating in illegal loggings also get some punishments in to like compensate, or their license to proceed is frozen. And in social, mostly they face conflicts with ancestral lands because, yeah, ancestral lands with the villages because they feel like that those are their lands from that have been passed from generation to generation, and they feel like it belongs to them. But then it doesn't necessarily belong to them. It's like something that they gatekeep for a long time. But these hatei, they are already granted the lands from the ministry, from the government, because though they are basically currently the official owners that can grant these lands. And yeah, I think those are the conflicts that we still face today, and maybe it should be more specialized, and we can integrate more cooperations with the villagers and also with the ministry themselves.
Oh, because you literally answered another question of mine. Ha ha! Darn, I lost another question. In good humor. All right. So that is interesting that you mentioned about cultural, about like ancestral grounds, because that's actually one of my other questions. Like, what cultural things that might be an issue in an issue with the whole idea of HTI. I would like to ask in like a bit more technical, if you are willing to answer, is you did mention this HTI would help deal with a lot of the lands also, like dead lands, but in like healing the lands, cleared lands, cultivating sustainability, and all those kind of things. Does that make sense where I'm going with this?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. are you able to explain like how exactly the concept of monoculture can be sustainable in a long time period? Because in my understanding, again, very limited understanding, not a biology background, is that you plant only one type and then after that you harvest it and then you replant the same thing. So it becomes a question like how will it be sustainable in the long term, because there might be an impact to say the fertility of the land and so forth.
Okay. There are a few points that I would like to point out that it's first it's the lifespan of the hate themselves. So these trees are planted not all at the same time, but in like gradually each year. So let's say there are like a land of hate was divided into like 7 parts, 8 parts, and each land was planted in this part. One part is planted this year, and the other part is planted next year, and in 2 years, and 3 years, and so forth, and so on, so on, so forth. So by the time they plant the last area, the first one is already able to be harvested. So that's why the carbon sink, the absorption of carbon will be continuous, because even though this one is harvested, another one is still growing. And even so, even after harvest, the carbon still lie inside the roots. So it's sustainable. And also, second, these monoculture trees protect the trees in the natural forest, because if all the trees planted are in the natural forest, then logging will also come from natural forest, in which even in natural forest, not only the big trees, but also those monoculture trees will be from forest, and it will alter their ecosystem from like the exposure to sunlight and all that. Then it will not decrease the fertility of the soil, because if anything, it restores the fertility of the soil, because previously it was basically dead lands, abandoned lands. But as these hate trees are planted, it will become fertile and able to grow these kinds of trees, even though going through drainage. But as long as it's not conflicting with the peatlands, it's still okay for the environment.
Interesting. It might be a skill issue on my side because I have a difficulty of understanding how this cycle would work. I mean, like I see how you explain the cycle, which is great. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. It's more of like then when say this one is already harvested, do we actually like immediately replant it, or is there like some sort of response to it to ensure its fertility of the land, or is it that means it's already dead?
Oh, it's not dead. It's maybe they can check whether it's still fertile and if it can be replanted immediately. But I think mostly it is indeed replanted immediately. Just of course they will need to check the quality of the soil first. But it will be replanted to continue or redo the cycle of the annual replanting.
Okay. I'm a bit curious in that area still, because it feels like there's a missing link somewhere, probably in my brain more than in yours, of like what would happen in say another 20 years with this cycle continuously on, because if I understand it correctly, like plants prefer certain nutrients from the land itself, which when you repeat the whole cycle over and over again without any extra response to it, then that land is basically stripped off its nutrients of a certain amount. And so that's why biodiverse can live longer in a lot of ways, because there's a lot more other species that helps maintain the whole ecosystem and all that. But again, not the biology teacher. So perhaps the last question I would like to ask, in response to these days hubbub about the economy and all that shenanigans, would you consider this as a part of an effective solution to Indonesia's economy, especially in these current times?
Okay, regarding these current times, it is indeed hard to say, because we know that dollars are fluctuating and stuff. But then sometimes even with dollars fluctuating, payments are in dollars, and if we adjust to that currency value, we can instead, some way, get extra profits from it because we get dollars, but then we need to convert it to rupiah, and it's gonna be stuff. But I know that it's not as easy as that. So theoretically, this will definitely help the economics because we need more expansion of ATE, and if there are more expansions, we can eliminate dependency on imports and instead prioritize exports. And after fulfilling the national demand, we can go for exports, and exports will make us profit more. And after that, like heavy machineries, with more production of heavy machineries, I think it will be also profitable to our country, and because some of the parts are also imported from other stuff. And also, I want to answer your question earlier about the nutritions. I think because the trees that are planted, the leaves are left behind, right? So these leaves provide the nutrients for the soils because they will kind of like decay in a, I don't know, is that the correct word to use it? But with those trees, with those leaves, it's gonna be in all over the soils, right? So it's gonna be still kind of with feed with nutrients. But the trunks are indeed go away.
Okay, time is over. You've done a great job, Natalie.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So here's what we'll do. Natalie and friends and family, advisors and panelists will meet over here for photos.